Hello, I'm Sarah Coates and you're watching I-24 News. We begin here in the region, and Benjamin Netanyahu will be officially announced tonight as the winner of the 2019 election, securing a record fifth term as Prime Minister of Israel. Confirmation coming exactly a week after voting day at the end of an intense election campaign. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Ellie Hockenberg explains what's next.
It's on. Benjamin Netanyahu is set to officially begin forming a government.
What is different about this night? This night is all sweet. There is nothing better about it because of you.
After 2 days of coalition consultations at the Israeli president's residence, Netanyahu received the support of 65 out of 120 future lawmakers, securing a potential right-wing government.
Together, we achieved a historic achievement. And I promise I will continue to work on your behalf and on behalf of every citizen of Israel. And I mean it.
But the victory celebrations will soon be replaced by arm wrestling, as all of Netanyahu's potential partners will now try to maximize their clout and get prestigious ministerial portfolios. This without even mentioning the internal race within the ruling Likud party, with about 15 Likud officials expecting to get a top position. A first hurdle ahead is actually an old one. Hawkish Avigdor Lieberman of the Israel Beitenu party insists on not just getting his old job back, the defense ministry, which is desired by many, but on passing the much contentious ultra-Orthodox draft bill that will ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students joining the IDF. The ultra-Orthodox parties, for their part, which have only increased their political clout with overall 16 seats, are opposed to this and have no plans of backing down from one of their most pressing concerns. But Netanyahu, who is still high from the relief of victory, has no intention of letting anyone undermine his future fifth government. Ellie Hockenberg, I-24 News.
Meanwhile, one of the biggest obstacles facing Netanyahu as he builds the next coalition government is the ultra-Orthodox draft law, which is a contentious issue and brought down previous governments. Our diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim has the details.
Now the difficult part begins. In just hours here in Jerusalem, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will receive the mandate from President Reuven Rivlin to try to form his fifth government. In order to do so, though, he'll have to reach some agreement with Avigdor Lieberman, the head of the Israel Beitenu party, and the heads of the ultra-Orthodox or Haredim parties. At the heart of the matter, the ultra-Orthodox draft bill, which has brought down, directly or indirectly, two governments so far. That bill would require more and more ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students to be drafted into the IDF like most Israeli Jews. Those students receive blanket deferments as long as they are actively studying. Lieberman tried to pass through legislation in the last government to get those numbers up. The ultra-Orthodox refused, and the government eventually would fall apart before a Supreme Court deadline to pass the legislation came into effect. How can Lieberman and the ultra-Orthodox get on the same page? It will be one of the toughest things for Netanyahu to try to do over the course of the next month as these negotiations go on. Earlier today, Reuven Rivlin, the president, received the official election results from the chairman of the Central Elections Committee. Here's what Rivlin had to say about the whole election process.
I am hopeful we will return to the daily routine in the near future and under the leadership of a government that will be big and stable if possible, that will reflect as much as possible the will of the people.
And now it's up to Netanyahu to try to find a way to bridge the gap between the secularist Lieberman and the ultra-Orthodox on this very thorny issue that has plagued Israeli society for decades now. Mike Wagenheim for the president's residence in Jerusalem for I-24 News.
Staying in the region, and the World Bank is warning of a real crisis in the West Bank if the Palestinian Authority doesn't find a solution to an ongoing tax dispute with Israel. Now, as it stands, Israel takes about $190 million per month in customs duties on products bound for Palestinian marketplaces after the goods pass through Israel's ports, then transfers that money to the PA. But earlier this year began deducting about $10 million of that, which is the amount the PA gave to families of convicted felons. The World Bank says the unresolved standoff deepens a fiscal crisis, which could increase the PA's financial gap from $400 million last year to one exceeding $1 billion in 2019. The PA has seen a massive drop in direct foreign aid, largely from the US, which last year cut hundreds of millions of dollars. An Israeli court has upheld the deportation of the local director of Human Rights Watch, ordering him to leave the country within 2 weeks. Now, the Jerusalem District Court rejected an appeal by Omar Shakir to remain here in Israel, citing his support of boycotts of the country. Israel enacted a law back in 2017 barring entry to any foreigner who knowingly issues a public call to boycott Israel. The ruling marks the first time the law was applied to someone already living in the country. Let's go now to Cuba, where the Trump administration has just announced it's suspending a law and will now allow Americans to litigate against companies in Cuba who are doing business in property which were taken from the US after the revolution in 1959. Now, this move marks a change in over 2 decades of US policy on Cuba. Now, this new shift in policy against Havana may harshly impact a push by Cuba to bring in foreign investment, perhaps even intensifying an international trade dispute between the US and Europe. Here's US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Cozying up to Cuban dictators will always be a black mark on this great nation's long record of defending human rights. For these reasons, I'm announcing that the Trump administration will no longer suspend Title III. Effective May 2nd, the right to bring an action under Title III of the Libertad Act will be implemented in full. I have already informed Congress of my decision. I encourage our friends and allies alike to likewise follow our lead and stand with the Cuban people.
Now to Yemen, where Houthi rebels say a veto on a congressional resolution that sought to end American involvement in the Saudi-led war in Yemen shows that the US is behind it. The US leader says this resolution is an unnecessary, dangerous attempt to weaken his constitutional authorities, endangering the lives of American citizens and brave service members. The resolution had passed both the House of Representatives and the Senate, marking the first time both chambers of Congress had supported a war powers resolution which limits the president's ability to send troops into action. Backers of the measure say the Saudi-led bombing campaign in Yemen has made the humanitarian crisis worse, and they've harshly criticised Riyadh for killing civilians there. A date for a referendum on presidential terms in Egypt has been set after Parliament approved amendments to the constitution which could keep President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in power until 2030. Now, the changes, which will be decided between April 20 and April 22, would extend his current term to 6 years and then allow him to run again for a third term, which would last 6 years. Critics say the amendments would bolster the role of the military in political life and increase the president's power over the judiciary. A date for the referendum has been confirmed, but banners are already up in Cairo encouraging Egyptians to take part.
We have complete trust in the political leadership and in terms of what we achieved on the ground for stability, security, and safety. We approve of the constitutional amendments.
And we're going out for a short break, but when we come back, more drama between the United States and Cuba. We'll go in depth about that right after this. Stay with us.
Stories. Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all.
There's more to the news than meets the eye. Many voices, many faces, with interests often at odds. We take you deeper beyond the headlines, inside the drama, the controversy, perspectives. There's more than just one view. Politics, economics, business, and technology. Get the real news and the real insight about what's happening around the world. Michelle McCory breaks down the top stories of the day from the Middle East to the U.S. Weeknights beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern. Go beyond the headlines every day on I-24 News. Host Ami Kaufman talks to the news makers and pundits to bring you the story behind the headlines.
Watch The Spin Room, Mondays and Thursdays, 4:05 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Thanks for staying with us. Let's go now to unconfirmed reports emerging that the Palestinian Authority funneled a large amount of money into the Israeli elections, which were held on April 9. Now, according to some Arabic media sources, the cash went to a committee that aims to advance the Palestinian approach to a political solution. It's understood an internal document was sent to the chairman of the PA by Mohammed al-Madali, who's tasked with preserving ties between Maqta and is the presidential compound and Israel. Now, 1 month ahead of the elections, this was allegedly sent, titled Budget for Monitoring the Elections of the Other Side, with a request to also transfer 15 million shekels, which equates to roughly $4 million US, intended for those who support a two-state solution. And for more on this, I'm joined here in the studio by our senior international affairs correspondent, Owen Alterman, and our senior Middle East correspondent, Mohammed Al-Qasim. Mohammed, thank you. Let's start with you. Tell us, how reliable is all of this? How reliable are these reports we're hearing?
Well, let's look at the source first. This came from a news media outlet that is close to Hamas, and it's not favorable to the Palestinian Authority and to President Mahmoud Abbas's own Fatah party or the Palestinian Authority. We could not authenticate the document itself, which was published on this website and then was carried out by other media outlets in the Palestinian territories as well as in the Arab world. It's not a secret that President Mahmoud Abbas has instituted a committee, a branch of the Palestine Liberation Organization at the end of 2011, put Mohammed al-Madani, who is a Fatah member, in charge of it, and they called it the Communication Committee. This is a committee that deals directly with the Israeli public. President Mahmoud Abbas believes that he could speak directly to the Israeli public and influence the Israelis to the point that when they go to vote, they can vote for parties that are in favor of negotiating with the Palestinian Authority. Obviously, after the results of last week from the Israeli elections, that this strategy has failed and failed miserably for President Mahmoud Abbas. But this is a committee that exists. Now, regarding this allegations and accusations that 15 million shekels, the equivalent of close to $4 million, have been funneled into this committee, it has been vehemently denied by the Palestine Liberation Organization. I called on Mr. Mohammed al-Madani's office, and he denied that this happened. He said that we are in constant communication with the Israeli public on different levels. They have visited Al-Muqata'a, the presidential compound, a number of times. I was in those meetings also a number of times. but he said that we were never given money to influence the Israeli elections.
And tell us, Mohammed, you mentioned that the Palestinian Authority does try and influence the Israeli public. How much so?
Well, they try, and they try to speak directly to the academics. They try to speak to the left, or whatever is left of it here in Israel, Meretz Party and others. In fact, they visited President Abbas in his office not too long ago. They speak directly to the Israelis, to the Arab Israeli citizens. They speak directly also to the Eastern Jews. President Abbas still believes that they are the link, the missing link that would influence the Israeli public, that would also take the Palestinian narrative directly from Ramallah to Israel, and then he relies on those meetings and those people who come to meet with him to spread the word, and they in hope that they will support the two-state solution. This has been going on for about 6-7 years now, and again, it hasn't really materialized. There is a huge objection to it from within the Palestine Liberation Organization, a huge criticism even from the Palestinian public of this committee, but President Abbas is still supporting it.
Okay, Mohammed, thank you. Let's move on now and go back to Cuba, where the Trump administration has announced it's suspending a law and will now allow Americans to litigate against companies in Cuba who are doing business in properties which were taken from the US after the revolution in 1959. Now, this move marks a change in over 2 decades of US policy on Cuba. The new shift in policy against Havana may harshly impact a push by Cuba to bring in foreign investment, perhaps even intensifying an international trade dispute between the US and Europe. Here's US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Cozying up to Cuban dictators will always be a black mark on this great nation's long record of defending human rights. For these reasons, I'm announcing that the Trump administration will no longer suspend Title III. Effective May 2nd, the right to bring an action under Title III of the Libertad Act will be implemented in full. I have already informed Congress of my decision. I encourage our friends and allies alike to likewise follow our lead and stand with the Cuban people.
And Owen, tell us, why has this been brought in now?
Well, first of all, Sarah, it's happening under the Trump administration because the Trump administration has a more hardline policy on Cuba. Again, in part of the tradition of most Republican administrations. Again, a lot of support in the Cuban community, traditionally in Miami, for those Republican administrations who were tough on communism. That tradition has been kept by the Trump administration as well. Why in particular now? May have something to do with Venezuela, a government that's been supported by Cuba. In fact, the State Department has accused Cuba of exporting communism and exporting its revolution to Venezuela, something I'm sure the Cubans would not necessarily deny. But Venezuela, a very, very important foreign policy issue for the United States and an important domestic policy issue for the Trump administration. Why? Because in the 2020 election, the state of Florida expected to play a pivotal role, as it always does. And again, there's a large number of Venezuelan exiles in Florida who want to see a harder line on Venezuela, and Cuba is connected to that. So again, this is part and parcel of that whole policy. But Sarah, we're talking about a lot of money here, potentially $8 billion with a B in claims. So these are some big ticket litigation cases that are going potentially through American courts, really targeted at Canadian and European companies.
Certainly, Owen, and tell us, what does this mean for relations between the United States and Europe?
Another trade spat. Again, another spat over extraterritorial imposition of sanctions. That is, imposing sanctions not on Cuba or Iran, but on European companies that are doing business in Cuba and Iran. The Europeans saying, the U.S. government, Trump administration, slap whatever sanctions you want on your own companies. Put on whatever sanctions you want on your own people. But why are you touching our companies? Why are you targeting our people? And the Europeans say that they'll take the United States to the World Trade Organization. Sarah, for those of us sitting here in Israel, looks a lot like the debate over Iran and Iran sanctions and those secondary sanctions that have been such an important piece of American policy toward Iran. Now, American courts could be used to try to get huge judgments against European companies, for example, that might run a hotel on land that was owned by U.S. persons or a U.S. company before 1959. Remember, before the revolution, Americans were huge investors in Cuba. There was a lot of cultural connection, again, because of geography. And there might be a lot, and there seems to be a whole lot of land and other property that's at stake here. Again, a lot of Canadian and European companies could pay the price. Europeans not very happy about it.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see what happens there. Senior International Affairs Correspondent Owen Alterman, Senior Middle East Correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasem, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Controversy in Spain just 11 days before the country heads to the most unpredictable elections in decades. Vox, a small but increasingly influential far-right party, is creating controversy. Spain's election board banning Vox from participating in the only confirmed television debate for the election, essentially saying the party is not big enough. Our international correspondent Bianca Zanini brings us a story of the rise of yet another European far-right party.
Make Spain great again. That's what the country's fast-growing far-right nationalist Vox party is promising to do. With a countdown to what's set to be Spain's most bitterly fought general election in decades, Vox's message is clear.
Spain cannot be discussed. It cannot be dialogued nor negotiated. The unity of Spain must be defended until the end. It is common sense to say that Spain is our home, with walls that are our frontier, and we open the doors of our home to whoever we want.
Spain, a country of 46.7 million citizens, has 17 autonomous regions. Last year, an independence movement in one of them, Catalonia, created one of the deepest crises in Spain's recent history, something Vox is profiting from.
We don't want Catalonia to leave Spain, and we want true equality for all Spaniards.
According to the latest polls, Vox will take around 10% of the vote on April 28. The first time in 30 years, the first time since Spain became a democracy, that a far-right party will have more than just one seat in parliament. In true Trump style, Vox leader Santiago Abascal wants to build a wall at the border of Spain's North African enclaves to stop immigrants, and he wants Morocco to pay. Taking things a step further, he's pledged to limit mosques and ban the teaching of Islam in state schools. The party was created 6 years ago and used to be a tiny fringe group. But in December last year, that changed. Vox won an unexpectedly high number of seats in the regional elections in Andalusia, taking the country by surprise, the first sign of their growing support.
I came for Spain, for my children, for my grandchildren, and for all the Spaniards. They do not know what they are going to lose if we continue in this situation, and I think Vox is the solution.
The Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, led by current Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, is expected to win most votes, but falls short of a majority. Vox then could be the kingmaker in the elections, backing a coalition of right-wing parties. As Election Day approaches, the rise of Vox puts it firmly inside the group of far-right nationalist parties gaining increasing power in Europe. Bianca Zanini, I24 News.
Russia has earned its share of headlines in the Middle East in recent years. Most are about its role in Syria, where Moscow has emerged as the leading power. Now, a meeting in Moscow and comments by the Palestinian foreign minister may show that Russia is increasingly interested in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Our senior international affairs correspondent Owen Alterman has more.
The flags of the Arab world laid out, the foreign ministers at the round table. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov hosting a summit Tuesday with his counterparts from the Arab League. High on the agenda, the Trump administration's decision last month on the Golan Heights.
We both reject the well-known U.S. recognition of the occupied Golan Heights as Israeli territory. It violates all known UN resolutions and the UN Charter itself. It leads to increased tensions in this region.
Russia's favorable views on the Arab-Israeli conflict are getting Palestinians' attention, with the Palestinian foreign minister telling Russia's Sputnik news agency that Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas would meet Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if, and only if, the invitation came from Moscow. The meeting may never happen, but the statement itself is valuable to Russia. It and Tuesday's Arab League meeting show again how Russia wants to be seen as a Middle East power broker.
Russia has confirmed its offer to the Israeli and Palestinian leaders to meet on our territory without any preconditions.
Experts say that Russia wants to trade power in the Middle East for the power that Russia really wants, sway in what Russia calls its near abroad, in places like Ukraine, where Russia feels it needs to have significant influence, but where the West is challenging that influence. Russia has built a name as the key player in Syria, an essential partner for Iran, and a country that wants strong contacts with Israel. But Moscow has not forgotten the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and may be pivoting back in that direction. Owen Alterman, I-24 News.
And finally, let's move to the Israeli spacecraft mission to the moon. And an initial investigation shows a malfunction on the Bereshit spacecraft inhibited proper engine activation, leading to the crash moments before landing on the moon. Now, after the malfunction, a command was uploaded to the spacecraft. This led to a chain of events inside, which then turned off the main engine and prevented proper activation. Israeli experts are continuing to investigate what went wrong at the end of the mission last week, with final results to be then released. And that is all we have time for this edition of I-24 News. I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for watching.